Now let's change gears a little bit. Let's go talk about a facultative long day plant, which we all know and love, which are petunias. Facultative long day plant this is the model that was first done back in the 1940s, showing a lot of the phenomena that we're going to talk about. And it's really important to understand these because you kind of wonder sometimes, but I put lights on them and nothing happened, or I they're just flowering even though I did nothing. Remember, once you've induced a petunia, they're going to continue to flower indefinitely if there's a minimum light intensity. It's more common in the seedling that there is a juvenility phase. Vegetative plants don't have a juvenile phase because basically they're already mature and they're flowering. So as long as they haven't cycled them through a short day, they're basically going to throw flowers as long as the days are modestly long and the light intensity is there. But let's just talk about seedling juvenility. What it means when it's a facultative long day plant, I did research a number of years ago on petunias, and basically after they've unfolded 23 leaves, they will have a flower regardless of photoperiod. But if you put them under long days, they will initiate flowers under 11 nodes, so they'll flower much faster. So if you have basically you look at a petunia about 15 to 20 days after the seed has germinated is when they're first responsive to the photoperiod. And why is that? Is because they have to unfold that and develop that many leaves, and it takes about 15 to 20 days to basically get that leaf count on the plant, which is they unfold about they initiate somewhere around 7 to 11 nodes, and then bam, they're basically are ready to be initiated if you have them under long days. So when you're growing multiflora, grandiflora, what stage is that? It's usually about when there's 2 leaves unfolded. Wave, they're a little bit different in their breeding, and so therefore they require about 5 to 7 leaves have to unfold. And a leaf unfolding is, if you count the leaf that's straight up, that's the first leaf you count, and then you count them all the way down, but you don't count the cotyledons. So once you've got 5 to 7 leaves on a wave, it can be induced. Lighting before that has no difference. Lighting after that just causes a further delay in flowering. So that's when you really want to hit them at the first time. So when do I do the waves? Well, actually, there's different critical photoperiods, the minimum day length required, and there's a table in this chart. There's also tables on the Pan Am website for wave petunias telling you are you in group 1, 2, 3, or 4, and that this is the minimum day length, how long the day has to be to basically trigger flower initiation. Some of you have basically challenged with Easy Wave Pink. Easy Wave Pink is basically one of those plants that do require a minimum photoperiod day length of at least 11 hours to initiate, whereas the some of the other varieties basically initiate as soon as the day length gets down to 11 hours. So basically think about your earliest flowering are those that where the day length is 10 hours, and those are the ones that flower the most rapidly, because usually you've got 10 hours across most of North America. Sometime by the time you're in February, you're going to be initiated, but then you still have to unfold the leaves. And so the question is how do I time my waves? Well, you can time your waves, and there's a tool that we'll see in a minute. But keep in mind that for floral initiation on long day plants, if the temperatures are in the range of 65 to 75 degrees, you can very easily induce these to flower. A lot of times photoperiods are sensitive within a very tight window of temperature, 65 to 75 degree night temperatures. If the night temperatures are less than 65 degrees, they basically are not photoperiodic. If the temperatures are over 75, you basically start to delay induction. So you really need to have those temperatures dialed in. So not too hot, not too cold, but just right for best initiation. I just mentioned something we've done many years ago, which is how you do a fast crop. And how you do this fast crop is with seed raised is use a 288 plug so that you got a little bit more space to grow the plant, and you basically grow them under long days once they have about 2 leaves unfolded. This is best to do with multiflora or grandiflora, more difficult with waves. And then you basically put them on a 14-day fast finish when you transplant them, and you keep them warm in that 65, 75 degree night temperature, and you can get very rapid development because they're all induced in the plug, and then they basically just have to be turned out and flowering. So I mentioned this Wave Smart Scheduler, which is in the Pan Am website, and basically it will give you different temperatures that you're going to be forcing at, and then how many days to flower. And you can see on this chart that there is a range of speed of flowering. You know, if you take a look at Easy Wave White under 68 degrees night temperatures, once it's induced, you can flower in 39 days. Whereas if you take Wave Purple Improve, it can basically take, or Classic, it takes 49 days. So it takes 10 days longer. And it's just because of the genetics. In the Wave, they're working to get earlier and earlier flowering. And of course, seed petunias, they've bred a lot of the photoperiod sensitivity out of them. So they're much easier to flower. So hopefully you understand facultative long day plants. Petunias is the classic. Critical temperature, get in the zone, get the plants up to size, induce them to flower. Usually you can induce them with about a week of long days. And then at that point they're induced, and then transplanting them and then just giving them enough light that they'll just flower right straight through. Let's quickly move on to some other plants. Calibrachoa. This is a fairly new set of genetics compared to petunias, where they've had a lot of generations of breeding to remove some of the photoperiod sensitivity. Calibrachoa are still somewhat variable in their variety response and sensitivity to photoperiod. The critical photoperiod is definitely correlated with temperature, so that you need to make sure you're in the right temperature, that 65, 75 degree night temperature, for them to be responsive to long days. They take about less than 7 long day cycles to trigger flowering in some varieties. Some varieties need upwards to 14 days, but most of them will flower with at least a week worth of long days. So if you don't have long days everywhere, at least expose your young plants, the liners, to long days for about 7 days to make sure that they're fully induced before you move them into a final forcing conditions where the days are just naturally not necessarily long. Be careful that if the photoperiod drops below 12 hours, they will revert to vegetative condition, and then you're going to have to cycle through that vegetative leaves until you can re-induce them. So make sure that when you get unrooted cuttings of Calibrachoa, that you've got them under long days so that they don't revert to short days, especially during when you're rooting in December, January, and February. By March 15th, you're starting to get about 12-hour photoperiod, and so you're kind of home free. Remember, Florel acts like a short day. It aborts the flower. It stops flowering so that you have to restart them. There's classic pictures where you have the center of your plants are just all green. They don't have flowers in them, and it's because you've stopped them either through short days or Florel. Be very careful about that. Night temperatures greater than 62. I'd like to have 65 degree night temperatures, and photoperiods greater than 12 hours give you the best flowering response. Manage the temperatures in flowering to synchronize that flowering. So really watch what you're doing. Let's talk about pansy violas, because it's that time of year when the days are getting shorter, and pansies violas are long day plants, so that when you have a short day of less than 12 hours, it delays induction. Now that's a really beneficial thing during the fall or during the summer production, when the days are very long and the very warm night temperatures, when you basically start struggling with getting a stick in a pot where they induce too fast and you don't get that good basal branching to fill out the plants. In that case, what we do is we reduce the light intensity to basically trick them into believing they're under somewhat of a short day conditions, even though we're not pulling short days. And that basically what that does is it delays flowering so that we end up with good basal branching and a full plant. So if you struggle with stick in a pot syndrome, basically in the fall pansies, maybe you should be putting a little short days on them or reduce light intensity to get them to bulk. On the other hand, if they're flowering delayed, you may want to go and look at putting some long days on the plugs to induce them so that they will flower a little bit faster. Let's talk about snapdragons. This is probably one of the most common questions we get. Why are my snaps flowering so late? I plant them sequentially, but they're not. These are long day plants. The snapshot series is a good example of a summer flowering group 3-4 snapdragons that flowers under warm nights and long days. So if you grow snapshot, you must put some long days on them and keep them warm in the plug stage so that you can induce them to flower. So then when you transplant them, they flower right straight through, even though you're turning them back down and grew them nice and cool. If you don't want to light them, for early spring flowering, you want to use a variety called Solstice, a series Solstice. It's a group 1 snapdragon. And this group 1 snapdragon basically is induced under cool nights and short days. So you need to make sure that you've got the right series and the right environmental conditions. So although gets to be a little confusing, but these are some of the photoperiod tricks that you can use to induce optimum flowering. Invariably, every year we get questions about pot asters. Again, this is one of those that's classified as long days for initiation. But if you grow them continuously under long days, it slows its development. Conversely, what you want to do is you want to grow them under long days and then under short days for flower development so you get rapid uniform flowering. So if you go and you plant these in the Northern Hemisphere, grow them under long days, and then you transplant them in April, well, or even in the middle of March, basically what's happening is you're growing them under long days, inducing them, and then you're finishing them under the long days of the natural long days that are starting to increase as you go from March, April, and May. So you really want to be very careful when you're doing pot asters that you do these early, so that they have long days to initiate them, and then they have the natural short days of February and March to get rapid development, and that then you can grow them cool and flower them out. So be careful when you're actually growing them if you're trying to do this naturally, otherwise you're not. Make sure that you have at least 21 days after sowing is when they're sensitive to flower induction in the plug stage, and they're very, very sensitive to light conditions. Probably the other interesting plant is the begonia, tuberous begonia, the nonstop type begonias, and dahlias. Although they are not technically long day plants for induction of flowering, but the tuber, which basically throws them into a resting stage, which then leads to stopping flower, is responsive to short days. So if you want to keep the tubers from forming, so you want to prevent tuber forming, you basically grow them under long days, greater than 12 hours. And what that does is it just prevents tuber formation and prevents them from going dormant. How many times have you seen begonia tuber hybrid that you buy them in early, you get them in February, and you plant them under naturally short days, and they just don't really flower until you start getting out to May, June. Problem there is they formed a tuber, and you actually can feel it form down underneath the soil. Once that tuber forms, the lighting is too late. You've got to keep begonias and dahlias under lights from the time you receive them right straight through.